Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Podcast, the Legacy Edition, where conscious leaders unite to unlock their highest potential so collectively we can change the way the game is being played. Welcome to the Leadership Launchpad Podcast, changing the way this game is being played. And Happy New Year! Wanted to be one of the first people on the doorstep of 2026 to wish you a Happy New Year. As you heard, Tracey and I are now at the top of a beautiful mountaintop in beautiful Costa Rica, working on our own conscious leadership, priming of our visions and intentions for 2026. But while we're up there, we wanted to leave you with this resource that we've had our team cultivate on your behalf. This really is going to be the year where we take this mission full steam ahead in the direction of conscious leadership. This is absolutely the way that we believe we're going to change the way this game is being played. And that is why we are going to be doubling down on this concept and hot topic here in 2026. But before we do, we wanted to bring you this inspirational highlight reel from some of the top experts in the world in the space and place of conscious leadership that we were fortunate enough to have in on the podcast this year, sharing with you their take on what conscious leadership means and what this concept is all about and why this is going to be such a requisite aspect of your leadership development for the future of work. We've been talking about on the show in 2025 about the acceleration of change that all of our experts are predicting is coming down this pipeline with the arrival of AI, with all these future generations coming into the workforce behind our back shoulders. So yeah, we believe that this is the time when we are absolutely going to need to be at the helm consciously as leaders. And so, yeah, we've had our team put together this highlight reel as a bit of a jumping off point for your inspiration as you get cooking up and discerning on what this vision in 2026 is going to be for you in your own lane. So we hope you enjoy our highlight reel on conscious leadership. It's conscious leadership. It's understanding how to show up completely present and available to what is actually in front of you. Sure, it might look different. It might require different things, but the best way for us to be able to adapt and stay resilient so we can find the opportunities for growth buried in this adversity is when we show up in alignment, which to me means that we really are consciously pulling from a space and place of knowing what our values are, those things that inform our sense of purpose as leaders, and really making sure we're also in alignment with our greatest gifts and skills and strengths and talents and attributes so that we can bring all of those resources that were put in us for a reason because we're meant to create something new. Conscious leadership is where new choice comes from. It doesn't come from showing up unconsciously running on the pre-existing hardwire of the patterns and programs of yesterday. It requires that we're actually making new innovative decisions.
What conscious leadership to me means is even a step further, which is actually, I catch myself doing this, is like taking the time to think about what decision should I make in this situation. When my daughter is yelling at me because she's being a spoiled brat or whatever issues happening at home, do I react this way or do I react that way? And in the past, I would just react the way I knew, which was, in the day-to-day, some of the surface decisions you make, maybe you were doing some of that digging, but you couldn't do it all the time and you can't do it all the time. But where it matters, that's where I have to take a step back and say, this is going to have major consequences. This is going to impact her in this way. What decision do I go right or do I go left? And that to me is like next level of what we've been talking about, because it's actually taking maybe 60% of my decisions in the day and actually thinking about them and actually making a conscious decision that this is the impact I want to have on this individual. In the workplace, we don't have time to do all that, but I am so now conscious in the way that I show up for my people. And sometimes it's not easy. And sometimes there's a lot of pressure. But I always say I will be fair and I will be tough, but always with respect and love. And that's a decision that I have to make. But sometimes things can get really, really hot, and I need to step back and make a choice because I care about my people. And just because I know what my values are, it just doesn't equate that, I will make the right choice without actually being conscious, without actually thinking about it, without actually reflecting and saying, this is what this person deserves. This will impact them in a positive way. This is going to be what motivates them, and like unwinding that in like a few seconds to be able to come up and show up. And that to me is what is that next level of leadership 2.0 we've been talking about, which I worked really hard to show up in that way. But this is even, I would say, even deeper than that.
Consciousness is changing. You can feel it. You can feel it around you, and you can feel it in you, or you wouldn't be here. So now we're not talking about, is consciousness changing or is it not? We're purely talking about, how am I going to play with this role of consciousness in my life? Am I going to use this tool they're talking about? Am I not going to use this tool I'm talking about? But I know it's happening. I know I'm hungry for it. I know my community's hungry for it. And I know at some level that the polarization that I'm seeing all around me, it's going to be a tulip madness moment, and those sides are going to come back together as we always have. And we're going to move forward with a new understanding in this new world, whatever that looks like, whatever we help create. And that is our opportunity as leaders in this world. And that is why we've gotten the education. That is why we did those really hard lessons, so that we can be the change in ourselves and in the world that we want to see.
To define that consciousness, really, your level of consciousness determines how aware you are of your thinking, how aware you are of your feelings, how aware you are in your relationship to life and others. The more conscious you are defines how you see and how you experience and how you react to everything that comes into your life. Most successful conscious leaders really lead a mindful life. They lead a life where they have and invite regular, significant personal and developmental experiences into their life. They don't see those challenges, whether it's somebody, a death or a birth or using medicine or whatever it is they do to have that significant transformational experience. That's a part of their life because they use the mindfulness and the meditation and the yoga to kind of maintain a level of consciousness.
To be conscious is the word conscience comes out of that word, and it means really to be conscious is to be aware of the impact I'm having on others. So if I'm a conscious leader, I'm leading and I'm aware of the impact I'm having on those around me, both the team, the clients, the culture, etc. And the more aware I am of that impact, the more intentional I can be about who I am, how I show up, who I become in the process of leading.
Conscious leadership is, to me, owning what you bring to every interaction, every engagement, every point of leadership, right? Whether it's formal or informal in your personal life. And what that really looks like, in the work that I do, is getting down to that level of knowing yourself. It's a reintegration with ourselves. I mean, so much of our day is spent on external focus, external requests and demands, and our environment is always taking away our attention. So this is like a power play, right? When we're stepping into conscious leadership, is getting, use the word at the helm, right? And I love that. You're getting back at the helm, at the wheel of your inner experience. And what, the work I do is it creates that choice point. That's really what it boils down to, is when you're a conscious leader, you've built this buffer, right? This choice point between stimulus and your environment and how you want to react and respond, how you want to respond intentionally. And what starts to happen is that you realize that your environment doesn't have to have as much of an impact on your state, on how you feel. It's a way to take your control back, your power back. And it's really leading yourself, right? You talk about this. That's the first step. And that's why it's an awakening process, right?
How well do I really know? So the blueprint of the people, even the leaders that are leading people, how well do I really know what they actually need and listen to that feedback? What I also would like to, because something like AV technology is often something that it's like is way up front, because the way that AV and technology are working in a space, it has to be just a plug and play. It has to be something you don't even think about when you're coming into the space. So asking yourself early on, like what investigate, because it's going so fast out there. So you need to have teams that are just on this with what's out there with AI, what can be used, first of all, but also the whole technology, and it needs to be just the plug and play. The smart buildings should hopefully be able to control the cooling and the heating and making the space for if you have a lab, making sure that it's not something
Optimal
people have to worry
conditions.
about. It needs to be just something that just functions. So you open up for the creativity and the brain power that everybody's trying to tap into. And then really just digging into what are the values, what signals do we want to say to bring out, why do we exist, and do people know why they're doing the work that they're doing, like tapping into the product, the service. How can they make everybody feel that in a space, be part of the design?
The reality is, if you want to remain relevant, you need to make sure that your people are seeing it, because they're not always seeing what's coming. Like, role of a senior leader is you need to be able to look around corners, and you have to be that person. And if you're not that person, you might find yourself in a position where you have a company that delivers high quality in a market that doesn't matter anymore. That's the worst position to be in. That leads to downsizing. That leads to basically just doing everything in your power just to stay afloat. And you are no longer on the list. You're chasing it as opposed to leading it. There's no worse place to be.
I think power and power dynamics is not talked about enough. And that at the end of the day, whether we're willing to admit it to ourselves or anyone asking or not, people fear for their jobs, or people fear for their inability to move their career forward, let's say. So they start to laugh hard at the boss's jokes that aren't that funny. They start to put on a persona that really doesn't match who they are. They start to hold back or be overly agreeable. And a lot of that's rooted in fear and power dynamics. So I think that is not talked about enough when we talk about self-awareness, because you see, again, really good people behaving in ways that are aligned with what they think the bosses need to or want to hear. But then when you go to the bar after work or the water cooler, you hear some of the disagreements that they have or some of the challenges that they're having, but that's not who's showing up in those meetings. And again, I have empathy, sympathy, and I've been there. Like, I'm not sitting here saying, oh, I've never done that, or I'm above. No, if you're in an organization, whether you're willing to admit it or not, you've fallen into that trap of being a little bit overly aligned with leadership for reasons of self-preservation or getting ahead. So that's one thing I think that really needs to be talked about more.
I really, really do try to understand from the various different personas and perspectives, like, you know, how are they feeling right now? Like, because each person's different, right? You know, even in the team, they're not all feeling the same thing. And then trying to build on that, you know, I think people talk about active listening and careful listening and these topics, but you have to. And so I think I genuinely do believe that for my style, whether it's in a time of chaos, whether it's in a time of, I don't know, restructuring or transformation or change, I think the key things that always come through are empathy, listening, fairness, and just being able to create that space where people know that they can come. There's no judgment, no matter what it is, you know. The personal thing, like, is it a divorce? Is it something they're just not getting right? So I think they are the foundations. Everything else that comes on top, you know, sometimes you have to give a bit more guidance, sometimes you have to, you know, let go a bit more, but I think they are the things that I see as authentically me, I would put. You know, being really self-aware of knowing what style is going to work for either what situation or what team. You know, like, know your audience, and being able to use that intuition that you have to understand whether somebody's, you know, being triggered, whether the words that you're saying is having any impact whatsoever or going to, you know, or whether you actually need to adjust your style because maybe you're not actually leading in the best way. Maybe it's coming from a position of stress or tiredness. I think that adaptability comes from just the awareness, self-awareness, and then that awareness of the team and being able to pick up on those cue signs, right? Of, yeah, this isn't landing, switch, angle, try something else, lower tone, higher tone.
That's why we've been talking so much about conscious leadership over the last 6 months, Cal, because everything that we're talking about here in terms of empathy and intuition and reading the room and being able to adapt to the needs in that room requires that we're actually consciously at that helm in our self-leadership, right? In our self-awareness. But we know, Tasha Eurich says that whilst 95% of us think we're highly self-aware, statistically, only 10 to 12% of us actually are. So, and I gotta say that stat has to be really like experiencing an even more deficit right about now because of the acceleration of disruption and all of the change in the ethers. We know that takes us out of presence. It takes us away from the helm when our amygdala gets triggered by all the uncertainty, right?
I always say it's like the portal for consciousness to really gain mainstream, because like now the trainer in my gym is telling me about astrology, which is wild. But there's like this consciousness that we all have, you know, the psychology vocabulary, and like we understand what trauma is, what patterns are. And I really think that moment in time where we were able to really pause for a moment and look inward and assess what was happening in our life was very impactful. And so I just started talking about human design, and it just snowballed. Our aura is the password that connects the things that are meant for us in our experience into our reality. But in human design, we talk a lot about the conditioning and the deconditioning process. And so the conditioning is kind of like a slime that is sitting on top of our aura, not allowing our soul to connect with the things that we know we're meant to experience in this lifetime. And so what happens is that from a very small age, when we showed our whole authentic self, we might have experienced rejection, emotional, or even physical punishment for showing our whole authentic self because it triggered the shadow in our adults or our environment. And so in order to stay safe, in order to have a sense of belonging and to feel loved, we reject parts of our whole authentic self. And these rejected parts of our whole authentic self become what in psychology we call the lost self. And these are parts of ourselves we bury so deep inside us because they cause us shame and make us feel like we are unlovable. And so we grow up being adults that try to gain back that sense of wholeness through intense but toxic relationships, through material things or substances to fill us up from the outside in. And so what human design helps us understand is that when we are able to look at the parts of ourselves that we deemed shameful and we bring them back to heal within our whole full authentic self, we are at this process of deconditioning where we can take off the slime from our aura and our soul can connect back to the things that are meant for us to experience in this lifetime. And so even though the strategy that comes with each type is really simple because it touches this root of shame and unworthiness, it is much easier to understand than it is to actually put in practice.